everyone. It is noon, so we'll go ahead and get rolling. I'll hand it off to Evelyn Nelson to get us started.
Welcome back, everybody, and happy December. As we all know, our holidays can be a wonderful time, but also a stressful time. So really appreciate folks joining us today, putting our heads together on how we can continue to support our students and one another. As we get rolling today, just a few reminders. Your microphones have been muted, but please do use the unmute or type in the chat. We love to hear your ideas and comments. It's also a-okay to eat lunch as we're going through things. We're glad to have you here and joining us today. When you're able, we appreciate you keeping your camera on. That really helps us connect and create our community of learning. I see that most folks have been able to do this already, but if you're able, please do type in your first and last name. That really helps us get your certificates of attendance emailed to you in a timely fashion. I think with that, I'll hand the baton off to our wonderful presenters today. Really eager to learn the information you all have to share.
Thanks, Evelyn. And hi, everybody. Happy December, the 12th month of the year. We're almost down to 2022. My name is Melissa Maris, and I am a clinical community psychologist, actually based out of Central Missouri, but have had the privilege to work with the Kansas team Telehealth Rocks for several years now, and I'm super excited to be here to talk about being ready to learn. So Stephanie, I will hand it over to you.
Yay, thanks, Melissa. So Stephanie Punt, nice to see you all again. This is your first time joining us. We love to have you and glad to see some familiar faces too. It's amazing how fast the year has gone already. So I am, physically located in Los Angeles, but I still love to collaborate with the team over back in the Midwest. I definitely love the Midwest and just everything about it. And with that, I have my PhD in clinical psychology and excited to kind of help integrate some of all the things I'm learning over here about just ways that we can kind of work more efficiently. Specifically how we can try to, kind of decrease our cognitive load or all the stuff that's floating around in our heads to make us more efficient, whether it be at work or with our families. And I think we have our coaching team joining us today too, Mariana and James. So glad that they are part of the team. Next slide, please. So we always like to start off with our hopes for today. So our hopes for today, just, to take a second and you can either share in the chat or just kind of think to yourself, how has the past month gone? It's been already another 4 weeks and a lot has, a whole holiday has happened since we've seen each other last. So just, it's nice to take a moment, just kind of reflect and think like, okay, it was a fast month, but, were there some positives in there? Some things that you wish you were doing more of, less of, those sorts of things. Today, we're going to talk about the difference between values and goals and how to set priorities and boundaries and how we can, boundary setting, well, it's easier said than done. We always talk about it, but how can we particularly use it to help us, strengthen our values and vice versa? Another way I like to think of this is kind of like, how do we define a life worth living? So this kind of all taps into those types of values. The cool thing is that mind-body connection strategies that we've been discussing and kind of, sprinkling along different types, that those different strategies can actually help us, kind of move towards our values through these different goals. And of course, we're going to also talk about ways to adapt these strategies in the classroom. Next slide, please. Of course, we have no disclosures. Nothing's changed since last time we saw you. And definitely, though, if you spot anything or want to talk to us about any kind of, potential bias, we all have implicit biases that come through. Please give us a heads up. We'd be more than happy to have that conversation. Next slide, please. Again, after today's session, we'll send out slides and a recording. And there should be some certificates coming your way. I see a head nod from Christy. So yes, that's happening. And then if you have any questions, lingering things that haven't been answered, or if you noticed, hey, I'm not getting the slides or recordings, please send us an email at Telehealth Rocks. Next slide, please. All right, so again, lots, I think a lot of people have received those books, the different resource books that we've sent. We'll go over that in just a brief second, but hopefully you've been able to look at them, maybe start reading some of them. There's definitely no right or wrong way to kind of use those books. Also you can still join our Facebook group. We have about 42 participants right now. So it's kind of neat to have our own little online community. I know everyone is super busy with their own stuff going on, but it's always been my goal to try, post some interesting brain fun facts, remind you of upcoming events, wish you well over the holidays, all those kinds of things. If you all have, if you're part of the Facebook group and want to, ask questions, share resources, that kind of stuff, you're always more than welcome to do that too. We're also still offering individual coaching. A couple of you have started this with us, and I think it's really neat just to kind of see how you all have been able to, kind of consistently carve out time for yourself to focus on some of these strategies and kind of brainstorm. It's been fun to brainstorm with you to figure out different ways that, to kind of incorporate within your classroom, within your life, those kind of different contextual factors. So definitely, it's not too late. If you, have a specific question, want to work with us one-on-one, you're more than welcome to get in contact, and we can set you up. We'll also continue emailing some resources, links, and tips. And again, for all of those of you who filled out surveys, we do appreciate that feedback. Next slide, please. All right. These, let's see, Christy, are they on the way or not yet?
They should be on the way soon.
All right, cool. So on the way to you soon are these two posters. Again, there's no right or wrong way to use the posters, right? Hanging them outside of classrooms, right? Quiet areas, maybe a peace corner where people are potentially waiting for the principal, right? There's lots of different places for these posters. Just our goal is to try to help provide you all with an example. Like these are, some good go-to grounding strategies to help kiddos and young adults kind of get out of their own heads, and kind of focus on other things besides the past, the future, all the what ifs, all the coulda, woulda, shouldas. And definitely, if you're looking at these posters or kind of just, throughout the year you look at it and you go, it'd be a lot better if I had XYZ in that poster, please let us know, because definitely this is an evolving process and we want to, make something that works for you too. So definitely invite you to, please give us feedback. We'd be more than happy to integrate that in the next iteration. Next slide. All right. So most of you have probably gotten these books, so yay. And I know sometimes, sometimes I know in of myself, when I, join a book club or have books to read, I definitely feel like I have to, or there's like a certain right or wrong way to do it. And, I like to think of these books as more of like a conversation starter. So, these would be great ways to, whether you're reading the book yourself, whether you're reading it as a class, whether it be just, help kiddos process kind of think out loud time. These are all great ways to use books, and there's definitely no right or wrong way to use the book. And next slide. All right, so we talked a little bit about this. So just to kind of summarize, we have lots of resources for you all. If you all have comments, questions, concerns, we want to definitely, attend to that and try to incorporate as many changes or, things that would work better for you in this process. So with our first kind of strategy of today, if you think about the broad overarching theme is like values, how to, pick goals that kind of align with those values to create a life worth living, how to kind of set boundaries, especially with the busy holiday schedule coming up too, and all the chaos that comes with that. One thing that can really help us, you can make all these exercises as long or as short as you want to, but one thing is grounding. So grounding, the purpose of it, there's other ways to get to it, like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. But with grounding, your purpose is that you're trying to reduce distraction and kind of focus on your current situation, your current thing. So maybe in the holidays, you are washing vegetables or you're chopping up vegetables. Focusing on the chopping action of those vegetables would be grounding. in a sense, right? Because you're kind of blocking out the rest. You're not ignoring it and saying that it doesn't exist. It's just more of like for that one moment, you're just focusing on the one task that you're doing. We as humans, we think we are awesome multitaskers, but we really suck at multitasking. We really do. And most of the time when we think we're doing more than one thing at once, like, you know, maybe right now I have phones in front of me and sticky notes and all these things in my office, but I'm actually not multitasking. If I want to look at the camera, or look at my phone, look at a sticky note, I'm actually just task switching really, really fast. And and how efficient I can do that depends on like if I'm tired, if I'm kind of frustrated with something, if I'm hungry, right, or hanger happens. These are all things that can actually make me less efficient at that task switching. And the less efficient we are, it kind of exacerbates our mood sometimes too. I know I definitely feel grumpier, and I actually more error prone. So being able to take short breaks, right, with this busy holiday stuff coming up, the more short breaks you can take, the more you can, and you know, a way to take a break would be like grounding, right? You're not checking out and not participating in the holiday activities, but just focusing on maybe those chopping the vegetables is enough sometimes to kind of give your brain that break from trying to constantly switch among these different tasks. So one thing that we can do together, next slide, please. Is a grounding exercise. So again, grounding can look different for all of us. And you know, it could be deep breathing, it could be the progressive muscle relaxation, it could be chopping vegetables, it could be writing a to-do list, right? And kind of being mindful and focused on that to-do list and writing it out. But there's actually kind of, you know, a way we can help focus our attention on it. So for the next couple minutes, hopefully you have a comfortable seat. And just kind of sit and gently feel free to close your eyes or kind of gaze at the ground. And if you're sitting in a chair, if it's comfortable, just feel your feet flat on the ground. And if you're, you know, sitting cross-legged in your chair, just kind of notice the sensations of that sitting motion. So once you're comfortable in your seat, sit up tall, close your eyes, or gaze softly at the ground ahead of you. Breathe gently, quietly, slowly in and out. With every exhale breath, allow the weight of your body to just sink further down towards the ground. And with every inhale breath, notice an opposing upward lifting energy that lengthens your spine and helps you feel a little bit taller. And with each exhale breath, release your shoulders, your back, and legs towards the ground. And with each inhale breath, feel a gentle lightness or a gentle upward lifting. And as you continue to slowly breathe in and out, just rest here a moment, finding a balance between that grounding and that lifting breath. With each exhale, feel it grounding, moving you towards the earth. And with each inhale, feel that upward lifting. Now take your attention more towards your exhale breath, that grounding breath, and let each exhale breath take a little bit more time than each breath in. So slowly lengthen and extend your exhales. And do so gently without trying too hard. And with each exhale, just notice all the points of your body which are touching down and connecting to the ground below you, to the earth. The soles of your feet, your ankles, your shins, And with every exhale breath, as you further ground yourself by releasing energy into the earth, just imagine yourself sinking. And as you continue to exhale, feeling connected to the ground, as if you're melting into the ground, just remember the accompanying lightness of each breath in. With each inhale, feeling that upward, lifting, energizing motion. And through each inhale and exhale, you might notice that your mind tends to wander and chasing a thought. And spend no time wondering why. Spend no time wondering on what. This is neither good nor bad. Just simply bring your mind back towards your body. With each inhale, that upward light, energizing breath. And with each exhale, that grounding sensation. And from this place of stability, continue to notice when your mind wanders off. And as many times as you need to, bring the mind back to the body, imagining your body as an anchor, stable and connected to the earth. And as you continue to breathe in, noticing more that upward lifting, energizing breath. And as you exhale, noticing that grounding sensation and connection to the earth. And as you continue to check in with your body, where your body meets the ground, as you breathe out, feel yourself releasing from this space. And as you breathe in, focusing on that upward, lifting, energizing breath. And with each breath in, notice yourself feeling more energized and ready to greet the day. So on your last breath in, feel aware of your body and the support of the ground beneath you. And as you exhale, you feel your body rise up and energized with more energy than you did before. So when you're ready, feel free to kind of bring yourself back to our space. So I always have the visual image of equating grounding or any kind of thing with a tree because of all the roots and all the things that a tree supports, right? Life-wise, you need the root system because there's a whole different ecosystem microbiome happening in there. There's lots of things, right, that go into supporting a very large or old tree. And so I kind of think it's neat to think about, right, how that applies to us, that even though we are all here, we're all individuals, there's a lot of different, right, weather systems that we're going through, or there's different, droughts versus flooding. There's all these different contextual factors that can come up against us. And while we can't control the situations that are thrown at us, right? We have some control kind of how we respond in terms of like the tree, right? If you're going to throw down more roots or if you're going to add more leaves, more branches, there's still things kind of within our sphere of control to help us out. All right, let's move on to our word cloud. So thinking to yourself, how are you feeling right now? There's going to be a link coming your way. You can skip entering your name. And remember that if you want to add, if it's like a couple word sentence or a 2-word sentence, to either mush them together and create one word or use that hyphenation. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's honesty. Yeah, I know I also feel a little bit sleepy right now. Not enough coffee this morning. I think to, those of you who, are feeling stressed, sick, unmotivated, just kind of generally meh would be how I categorize that. I appreciate your, just openness and sharing that. And I think just the range of different emotions, right, or feelings that we have right now, just among all of us, I think it's interesting to kind of, reflect and think about like, just right, how diverse we all are and how we can all be here in a, like a similar situation, same kind of context, but have all these other things happening to us at the same time. So I always think of this as like, it's a great way to remind ourselves of just how, how much different factors can really impact us day to day. And just, the range of, emotions are like a great, it's like our brain doing hypothesis testing. And so I think it's just neat to see again, too, that all of you, have a plethora of words that you can use to describe your emotions, whereas the average adult can only name 3 emotions. So I think just seeing all the different emotions and feelings that we talk about each time, I think that's definitely a strength in all of your ability to just kind of recognize and be able to check in with yourselves. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Let's start off with the content. Okay, so I'm sure you all have heard of values. So today we're kind of going over clarifying, aligning with, and committing to one's values and how that kind of taps into boundaries and goal setting and kind of how we plan our days or our weeks. So if you think about like, if you're, out in the woods, camping, kind of like the most basic device you can use, right, to make sure you find your way is a compass. And a compass is always going to point in one direction, right? It's going to point north. And it's different from, if you think about if you use Google Maps or any kind of modern GPS system, that takes you to a destination, right? I sit at work, type in my home address, and it tells me how long it's going to get there. And it tells me all the lefts and rights to get me to that one specific GPS address. With a compass, though, even if I used a compass to get home, one, it'd be a lot more cumbersome and a lot more difficult driving back with the compass in one hand, right? Coffee and all that stuff in the other. But if you think about a compass, right, even when you walk up and you get to your destination, it's still pointing north. So I like to think of a compass as like a value, right? You're always trying to, it's like your point of reference. You're always trying to move towards it, but you're never going to really get to it, right? You're not going to get to the destination. So it's kind of hard to think about, right? Like, well, why would I want to do that? Like, I like to check off goals and stuff like that. But so for our values are kind of like our compass or like our northern direction, right? There's lots of different things that we can do along the way. They're kind of like our GPS points. But overall with the value, it's this kind of idea that we are always, it can never be truly attained. It's like, it guides us in a direction. Next slide, please.
And so just kind of thinking about what Stephanie was just sharing about values and some of these pieces she already went through, but what are values? So these are big picture, unattainable, kind of the abstract principles, ideas, and things. And this is our chosen life path. This is the direction that we walk towards across different jobs and different cities, states, homes with different people. That kind of we're still walking in that same general direction. As Stephanie said, we don't really think of values as something that's obtainable. There's no kind of goal line that once we get there, we'll be able to check off and say, yep, I achieved my value. That values are something that continue on throughout our life. We develop them, as we're growing up, and then they continue to evolve. It's the greatest importance, right? So we talk a lot, especially in education, but also in mental health of, let's develop a good SMART goal. As an evaluator, I love goals and objectives and measurement, and all of those pieces underline all of those things though. And what we do, it's really the values that are driving kind of what we're talking about here. I think it's important to recognize that sometimes our values are known, sometimes they're unknown, and that they're always linked, and what we look for really are the behaviors. And so when we think about, how would I know what someone's values are? How would I know what my values are? What would I look for? And what we're going to be looking for is that behavior. And in general, our values are prompting our behaviors. And so that's kind of how we think about that. That's the expression of those values in those behaviors, and that this is really kind of the core of who we are and what we do. And that idea of sort of what matters most to us. And this is very much the practice what you preach. This is the practicing what you preach is, if my value is X, then these are the behaviors that you're going to see from me. And the thing that's challenging, and Stephanie was pointing it out, is that it's easy for us to lose our way when we have our values and there's a lot of other things going on. And then coming back to that idea of the compass, right? So that if we're out hiking and we get lost, that we have that compass, our moral compass, our values, to kind of make sure that we're going in the right direction. The real pickle though is what if the right direction, there's a bunch of hills and it's really, really challenging, right? And so then we have this choice of we're either going to make sure our behaviors are aligning with our values, which means we're going to face the hill and we're going to figure out a way to get over it or overcome it or get past it, or we have to change our values, right? And we are behaving in ways that are not consistent with our values. And that's often when we think about kind of more significant stress, burnout, even, kind of vicarious trauma, revictimization, kind of those words. A lot of times what we're talking about are situations where someone's actions, for whatever reason, are very much out of line with their values, which creates a whole lot of distress. And that struggling is real. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about values and behaviors is that we're often much better at noticing the disconnect between a person's values and behaviors when we look at other people. And so I'm sure we've all had that situation where someone who says, oh, well, I really value this thing, and says it over and over again. And if someone said, oh, well, what does that person value? You'd be able to say, oh, they really value health, spirituality, growth, that's what they value, but they continuously act in ways that are inconsistent with their values. And so that creates this confusion of, well, we say one thing, but we do another. I think the trick here is that we also have to do that for ourselves, which is really hard. Again, sometimes our values are very clear to us and they're consistent, and they're kind of the thing that we hold on to. And sometimes we have to look at our behaviors and say, what are these behaviors saying about my values? And is that really a value? And does that line up with kind of who I think I am and how I feel? So if we can go to the next slide, Christine. So some examples of kind of that hill or that struggle bus between our values and behaviors, and these are a few. So if one of my values is to be a good parent, right, and that's a value that I'm committed to, it might mean answering a whole bunch of questions for my children of these never-ending why kinds of pieces, right? It means taking a deep breath, acknowledging the curiosity behind the why and loving it, and then trying to respond in a calm, respectful, supportive way that is consistent with my values, even if I'm super irritated, because I want those behaviors to try to align with the values. Same thing with being a loving partner, right? That if my value is, if one of them is to be a loving partner, it might mean that I have to then do things, small favors, chores, that might really annoy me. But it's important to me to be a loving and supportive partner. And so those are the things that I'm going to do despite how I feel about it. Being a supportive friend. So that's a value. It might mean really engaging and trying to drum up some interest in things that I'm not really all that interested in, because I know that it's important for me to be a supportive friend, which means I'm going to invest in other humans. And just in the same way that I would want them to support whatever I'm passionate about, that I'm going to do the same. And so kind of just some quick examples there of kind of where those struggles often come in. And I think it's important to point out that all of these behaviors in the first sentence or the first word ends with ing, right? So answering, doing, showing, which also is kind of that indicator that these are ongoing and active and present. Again, there's no point where you say, okay, I've been a good enough parent and I'm not going to answer any more why questions, right? Like that's not a thing that happens. And so we have to continue doing this, moving forward and kind of, again, revisiting our behaviors and our values and if there's alignment there. We can go to the next slide, Christy. So this question of why. So I actually love why questions. I'm a person who asks why a lot. But I think that, and often in education, and I've heard this a lot, I'm not sure if you all have, but this idea of being able to answer this question of what is your why? Why do you do what you do? What is your why? What's at the heart of it? And, when we think about kind of the never ending kind of process of asking why, it seems like it can be endless, right? So if I were to ask you what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, you might say strawberry. And if I said why, you would say it's pink, and say why, it's fruity, and why, and you might come up with some other things, but eventually you're going to say just because. And that's the value, is when you get to the point that you've given the justifications and then it's the, well, just because. And that's really, when we think about that value, that's really connected to the just because. And that's really at the heart of what these behaviors then are really moving towards. We can go to the next slide, Christy.
Yeah, so just to add to what Melissa's saying too, that this is not an exhaustive list of value domains, but I feel like this kind of highlights some of the main domains of different values that we can all have. And also the important thing to think about too is like what we value or the emphasis that we place on a value changes across time. So maybe when we're little kids, right, we might value more maybe friends or social relationships. Maybe as adults, right, maybe it's more physical well-being, maybe it's more spirituality at the forefront. So it's important to think too that, right, like values are flexible. We can change kind of what we want our compass to head towards. We can sometimes too, if you start thinking about values and what's kind of driving these actions or behaviors, sometimes it's not like a clean cut, like, it fits into one box. Sometimes we have kind of these hybrid values of maybe it's like physical well-being, equal spirituality for me, or maybe it's mental emotional health is social relationships, right? So it's like there's lots of little hybrid categories that can pop up. And it doesn't really matter, right, what you call it. It's just more of kind of, how is it meaningful and what actions are you doing that helps you kind of move towards that direction. Next slide, please. So values clarification. This is something that I know I definitely do a lot with people, even with kiddos too. And I know I should do it one time for myself, and it's a lot harder than it sounds. So you think like, okay, well, what are my values? But I feel like the hardest part is to try to figure out the language or the words, or what do I actually value, or what's driving me. And so this is kind of one way to think about it. So first, right, you want to kind of identify what we call the value domain. So just like that big grid of things, is my value potentially more spirituality? Is it focused more on physical health? Is it focused more on social relationships? And then the value statement is kind of a more reflective statement. Just like kind of what Melissa went over, it's kind of like, it's almost like calling out what it is that you're doing that aligns with that value. So say if, for example, my, for my value domain, it's like family relationships. And so maybe it's, I value my relationship and role as a daughter. And so maybe my value statement might be, who do I want to be as an adult daughter? And then my committed action, it's like, well, then that's the part I'm actually doing. Is it calling my dad every week? Is it, what about that title or that kind of like that statement of I want to be a good daughter? Like what am I actually doing that kind of aligns with that? So even though it can kind of feel like kind of long and drawn out, right? But kind of if you're at the point where you're like, I don't really know what my values are, don't really know what I'm actually doing, or like what little goals along the way kind of track back to that value statement or that larger domain. This is kind of one way to try to break down the different steps, kind of help clarify, right? Like what are kind of the main pillars or values that you're actually using to kind of direct you. Next slide, please. So this is why our value is important, right? Because I feel like a lot of us, right, we're doing a lot of things. There's a lot of different actions. There's things that we value, right, or we're very outcome driven, but values are weird because it's like this environment of you're never going to quite attain it. So it's thinking about like, right, like what things do we do that align or kind of follow that trajectory of a value. And so take this empty jar, for example, and imagine if I were to fill it up with rocks. Once it's filled up with rocks, right, there's not a lot else that's going to fit. However, I can, fill it with sand, I can fill it with water, right? And it's going to take all those little spaces between the rocks. So if I were to fill it up with rocks first, add sand, add water, right, I can fit a lot of stuff in that jar. If I were to fill it up with sand first, right, take an empty jar, fill it up with sand and water, and then try add rocks in, the rocks aren't going to fit. So if the rocks are like our big priorities or kind of like a committed action towards that value, right, the doing, I would want to fill up my life jar first with those big rocks and then try to figure out where all the other stuff is going to fit. So the other stuff could be like chores, vacuuming, all those things, going to the grocery store, right? Those are all things that that have to happen, right? Or picking kids up from school, they have to happen. However, if my jar is full of nothing but chores, right? Say if chores are the sand, if my jar would be full of nothing but the chore part, it wouldn't be that fun to look forward to doing things, right? So that's why if you think about like this idea of a jar with rocks in it and kind of letting those actionable, like, things that are aligned with the values be the rocks, we can, insert some rocks in there or like some more meaningful actions, and then then try to add in how else can you schedule these other things that have to happen, and they will happen. But such that, right, we feel like it's more aligned with these values, and these actions might be easier to therefore do or kind of commit to, right? If we know kind of what our trajectory or what direction we're trying to go in with that. Okay, so let's head to our word cloud. So thinking about, right, things that we want to prioritize are the rocks in our jar of life. And then adding in all the other things after that. What would you place in that jar? Family. Yeah. And so the person who wrote myself, I definitely, like, I resonate with that, right? Because if we don't place ourselves first, it's hard to, do all the other things too. Yeah, so lots of family, friends, or kind of like social interactions, spirituality. I think those are all great things to have in that jar. And then try to fit in all the other things that we're going to do. At least we have we know what our kind of our goalpost or our signpost is where we're trying to go with this. Okay, well, thank you everyone for contributing to the word cloud. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we talked about values, we talked about aligning behaviors with values. And so now we just want to spend a little bit of time talking about something that is honestly one of my very favorite things to talk about, which is boundaries. And boundaries and limits, and what boundaries are and what they're not, and what we can do with boundaries. So a boundary, super simple explanation or definition, it's what is or is not okay with you. And so we create boundaries of this is okay, this is not okay, and that it can be really, really super simple. Ideally, our boundaries align with our values and also protect that space, that jar, so that we have room for our day-to-day actions. And there's lots of different kinds of boundaries. There are financial boundaries, there's physical boundaries and personal boundaries and relationship boundaries. A lot of times when I'm talking to educators and I talk to them about how much I love boundaries, they immediately go to, we should not have sex with our students. And that is true. And there's other kinds of boundaries too, right? And so lots of different ways to think about and use boundaries. One of the things, and it really wasn't until I was an adult and had a career and actually had kids that I really kind of understood this idea that we have a fixed amount of time in a day and an afternoon in our lives, right? And that by saying yes to something, it necessarily meant I had to say no to something else. And that when I started to put the yeses and the nos in that kind of comparison, it really helped me identify and live my values, and then try to create boundaries to protect that space. So if saying yes to this work opportunity means that I have to say no to putting my kids to sleep at night, that was not a trade that I was willing to make. And so kind of doing that comparison to say, am I aligning my time and what I'm investing my time in with my values? And if not, what kind of boundaries may I be able to put in place to do that? I think it's important to say that boundaries and limits exist for everyone all the time, even if we don't talk about it. So everybody has boundaries, just like everybody has values. Sometimes our value or our boundaries aren't explicit. We don't make them explicit. We don't make them known. Sometimes we don't even know our boundary until somebody crosses it. And then we're like, ooh, that didn't feel good. That was a boundary. And that's okay. Boundaries and limits are always there. But just like values and kind of aligning behaviors to our values, I think that one of the healthiest things we can do is try to be as clear about our own boundaries as we can be, and trying to communicate those to other people in a way that makes sense, and also trying to honor those boundaries and honor other people's boundaries as much as we can. And just to highlight too, that a lot of times when I'm talking education, mental health professionals, I think the reality is that, and some of the pragmatic pushback is, Melissa, why would I have boundaries at all? Because no matter if I have them or not, people are just going to walk all over them, right? To me, as a professional, it makes sense that I should be able to go to the bathroom whenever I need to. And that's not something that a lot of folks in their work context can do. And so why have a boundary around that if I can't do it anyways, right? And so there is a value in defining a boundary, even if you know that it's going to be hard to honor, either for yourself or for other people. And part of it is that it just is a good reminder of what that boundary is, and also a good heads up, a way to proactively know that, okay, this is a boundary that's being crossed, and heads up, I'm probably going to feel super irritated. I might feel hurt. I might have a lot of different feelings. And so even if I know this boundary, I've said it, I've communicated it to other people, just acknowledging that it's being violated can actually be really helpful to identify a feeling state and identify what it might be connected to. And as we track our feelings, recognizing which boundaries, when they're crossed, really, really bother us and impact our functioning, impact our ability to behave in ways that are consistent with our values. And so boundaries and limits are really, really super important. If we go to our next slide, Christy. And so I want to talk for a minute about no and the art of saying no. So some of this is a little bit tongue in cheek, but also I think December is a perfect month to bring up boundaries and saying no, and invite and encourage all of you all to say no as much as possible in the next month as you possibly can, based on your values and based on what you want to get out of this month. Surprisingly, even though it sounds so simple to say no, most of us struggle to say no, because when we say no, and whatever the reason is that we're saying no, we worry a lot about how other people are going to take it, if we're going to hurt someone's feelings, if it's going to seem like we're lazy, if it's going to seem like we don't work hard enough, or we don't care enough. We want to please other people more than we want to please ourselves, in the sense of honoring our boundaries and our values in that way. And so it's okay to say no, just like it's okay to say yes, right? But you have that choice, or I hope that you have that choice as much as you possibly can. But I also think it's okay for us to start talking about how no is a complete sentence. Having a boundary and saying no does not have to mean that you say no and then give a bunch of reasons why. It can just be a no. In a professional setting, if that is the space that you're in and you're asked to do something, and just saying no is okay. But because saying no is so hard and boundaries are hard, I think it is helpful to actually practice this and to have strategies that feel good for you. And so, the best strategy is going to be the one that you'll use and works. And so I often have these kinds of conversations with folks about how do we say no and then still, show our boss that we're doing a great job, still, be consistent with our values. The need is so great often in the context we're working in. We have to find ways to say no, even when it's really, really hard. So kind of some, basic tips of, if you are a person who has a hard time with boundaries, has a hard time saying no for whatever reason, it might be helpful. So I think one is, if you feel like there has to be something after the no, considering that idea, we catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So no, thank you, right? So just add the thank you, and that's great. So now you gave the rest of the sentence, you made no longer, but you did it in a polite way. I think there's also, just silence. And especially if, you're being asked to do something that you've consistently said no to, that you made a boundary very clear, especially for those of you all who, have a mental health kind of background, silence is really powerful, and people get really uncomfortable with silence. And I think that can be a strategy, and just being really silent. I always also try to have kind of a saying or something to say, just in case I don't know what to say, but I know that I want to say no, but I don't feel like I can. I'll get back to you, right? Give yourself time and space before you say yes. That's another great strategy. If you find yourself saying yes a lot to things that later you're like, oh, I wish I had said no to that, is just create time and space between the ask and your response. So I'll get back to you and then leave. I'll get back to you and then go and send an email from your desk. Thank you so much for asking. I'm not going to be able to do that, right? And absolutely, if you're a person who struggles with the boundary piece, doing it that way is fine. The important thing is to find ways to set those boundaries and do that. Asking for more information. So asking for a lot more information, saying maybe, not right now, or this kind of bait and switch idea, but be careful. So saying no to one thing by saying yes to something else, but making sure that the yes is consistent, more consistent with your values than whatever you're saying no to. And so trying to move the bar over a little bit. And I don't know if you all have seen the Brene Brown video on boundaries. It's hot linked in this slide, and I think Chrissy's going to pop it in the chat. Brene Brown does a lot of really great things in translating different kinds of content into a kind of manner that people can really hear and understand and resonates, which I love. This boundaries video is probably top 2 videos that I've ever played in a school context and doing professional development. It's really, really good. And it's funny and it's light, but it really goes into kind of boundaries and what it means and why boundaries are so important for those of us who value being generous and want to give and want to help, that boundaries are the way that we can do that. And so also some other links of kind of funny ways to say no. Again, I think it's helpful to practice and to plan ahead. But this is a space where we need to say no. And especially if we're being voluntold. This drives me kind of batty when, you know, someone else agrees to something that then falls on me. And then I'm voluntold that this is happening. And so kind of that boundaries piece, say no when you can, and protect that time if it's possible. Okay, so go to the next slide, please, Christy. And so boundaries, applications at school, there's a ton of these and lots of different ways that this connects. You know, focusing on consistency and predictability is important. Those are boundaries too, right? If you think about a basic school day, the schedule is a temporal boundary, right? How long classes are, that's, you know, a boundary. How long lunch is, when it is. And really focusing on how much consistency and predictability we can reach. We've said that over and over again, that that's helpful for everybody. But understanding that changes happen, things come up and that we can't plan for, but trying to acknowledge changes when they happen. Teaching, modeling, and practicing boundaries, using the language of, you know, I'm going to say no, and that's an important boundary for me to set because I value, you know, being able to get home and having dinner with my kids, whatever the thing is, right? But using the language for each other as, you know, colleagues and other adults, but also so that kids can hear what that sounds like. Boundaries are super important for all of us, but a lot of young people grow up in spaces where boundaries are either really fluid, which means they're changing all the time, or they're way too restrictive, which is also not great, or they change all the time. And so, you know, maybe don't understand kind of what the purpose of a boundary is, how to do it, how to say it, and what it means. Prepare and practice. So just like anything else, you know, teach, model, practice boundaries, practice, you know, how we can say it, how we can say no nicely, how we can say no gently, in a way that's still respectful. Giving advance warning when we know that there's a big change that's happening or some boundary, right, that is maybe not going to be honored. So if it's, you know, you meet with a young person after school every Wednesday for 10 minutes, right, just to check in as part of a mentoring program, if that's not going to happen, right, that means something. And so just giving advance warning that that's going to happen and just acknowledging that that's happening and that that's a change. Giving space for recovery after that boundary is crossed. So when something, I think about this a lot of kind of one of my values is safety and people feeling safe. And so if I'm in a classroom context where one young friend is having a really hard time and makes the entire classroom feel really unsafe for everybody else in the classroom, from my perspective, that's a safety boundary, right, and value that has been crossed. And so we need to give time and acknowledge that something has happened, so something has disrupted our kind of consistent and predictable flow, and giving space for recovery. My hint there is that the more we can lean into things that are consistent and predictable, when things get disrupted, the easier it's going to be. People like routine, and the more we can use routine, even as a way to kind of calm down, and to regulate our emotions, the better off we're going to be. And this was a big one for COVID. I think it's still helpful now that, you know, when a lot is up in the air and we don't know a whole bunch of things, focusing on what we do know is really helpful. So I'm not sure about the answers to any of those questions. What I do know is we have the next 20 minutes to learn together, and I care about you. This might be hard, but we're going to get through it together, right? So what do we know? We do know this small number of things, and just reminding ourselves what we do know, as much as possible, aligning that with our values is also great. And also that if we just talk about boundaries and limits, what it feels like to set limits, to set boundaries, what it feels like when those are violated, what it feels like when other people tell us what their boundaries are, how we feel about it. And again, talking about it out loud with other adults you work with and also with young people is really helpful. Saying that it feels bad when somebody doesn't honor this boundary that you set up, or this limit, or they cross this line. And so that we have that practice of talking about what it feels like. And again, what we can do different next time. So we go to our next slide, Christy. So some key takeaways here. Clarifying values can help us prioritize activities and set boundaries. Kind of a consistent theme or takeaway from our series, that these mind-body strategies can help us remain in the moment and manage stress. And again, just this encouragement around saying no, and that's enough. I would encourage all of you all to say no around the holidays. I think this is a particular time that often we get pulled into doing a lot of things, some of which are totally in line with our value, and that's great, and some of them that are not. But we matter too, and our boundaries and our values matter. And your values and your boundaries matter. And so I invite you to celebrate those this season, and to create that space for yourself as we move into 2023, which is super exciting. So with that, I think we have a couple minutes for questions. I don't know if anything has popped up in the chat, or Steph, if there was anything you wanted to add.
No, just again, it's right. These are all things that are easier said than done. But hopefully some of these, practical strategies will be helpful, and, that you'll be able to try it out in the next month. And if you get stuck, just let us know. We're here to help.
Fantastic. Well, I think as we wrap up and go to the next slide, our next session is on January 5th in the new year from 12 to 1. We will be sending out the slides and materials from today. But please, please, please reach out if you have questions. We have folks who are here to brainstorm and problem solve through kind of what this stuff means. I love getting pushback of, Melissa, that sounds great, but you don't know what it looks like in my context. So let's talk about boundaries. I'd love to have that conversation with you. It's not easy. I'm not trying to say that it is, but please reach out for help, ask questions. We would love to communicate with you and talk about what might work in these areas. So with that, I think we will say thank you and happy holidays. Happy New Year's almost. And we will look forward to seeing you all in January.
See you in January.